Imagine waking up on what should be a simple day, a day when all you want is to be by your mother's side during her final hours. Now, imagine being a decorated Navy commander, a man who has faced life-threatening battles with unwavering courage, only to be stripped of dignity at the airport gate. This is the story of Aaliyah Harper, a story that starts with a denied first-class seat, but quickly spirals into a national crisis exposing the painful reality of racial discrimination in America's skies. Why was a man with a proven record of service suddenly deemed unwelcome in the premium cabin he rightfully earned? What silent rules govern who gets comfort and who faces exclusion? How far will institutions go to protect their image while ignoring the very human cost of prejudice? Aaliyah's experience is more than a personal injustice. It's a mirror reflecting the deeper, systemic biases still embedded in our society. His calm resilience challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about equality, respect, and justice. As you watch this story unfold, ask yourself, what would you do if you were in Aaliyah's shoes? How far would you go to claim your dignity? If you believe everyone deserves the respect regardless of their skin color or background, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that matter. Let's begin. The cabin of Celestial Air Flight 742 was humming with the familiar sounds of preparation flight attendants moving briskly down the aisle. The low murmur of passengers settling into their seats, and the distant rumble of jet engines preparing to roar to life. But something felt different this morning at Monarch International Airport. There was a subtle tension in the air, a quiet undercurrent that only a few noticed. Aaliyah Harper stood near the entrance to the first-class cabin, the leather strap of his carry-on bag resting lightly on his shoulder. At 47 years old, Aaliyah carried himself with the steady confidence that only years of disciplined service could forge. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, and his dark eyes, thoughtful and steady, scanned the cabin as he took a slow breath, steadying himself. The sharp lines of his navy blazer and crisp white shirt gave him a dignified presence. A man accustomed to command and responsibility. He wasn't just any passenger boarding this flight. Aaliyah Harper was a retired Navy commander, decorated for multiple deployments overseas and known among his peers for his unwavering calm in the storm of battle. But today, that calm was tinged with something else, a heavy weight pressed against his chest. Deeper than the stress of travel or the usual uncertainty of flying. His phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. A message from his sister flashing across the screen. Mom's condition worsened overnight. Hospital says it's critical. Aaliyah's jaw tightened ever so slightly. He had been rushing to get on this flight to Chicago, where his mother lay frail and fragile, clinging to life in a way only a mother's love could explain. He pulled the message away and tucked the phone back into his pocket. Now was not the time for panic. He reminded himself of the countless moments in his military career when the stakes had been far higher, when lives depended on his clarity and steadiness. He could do this. He had to. The flight attendant's soft voices and practiced smiles greeted him as he approached the first-class gate. Samantha Cole, the lead flight attendant, gave a courteous nod. Aaliyah returned the gesture with a subtle, respectful smile. He handed over his boarding pass, feeling the slight pressure in his hands as he waited for her to scan it. It was then that Aaliyah caught the quick glance Samantha gave him, one that flickered just for a moment before she masked it with professionalism. Something in her expression felt off, almost like a hesitation. welcome aboard, Commander Harper," Samantha said warmly, though her eyes briefly scanned the boarding pass again, a subtle tightening around her mouth. Elijah nodded, stepping forward toward the plush leather seats that awaited in first class. But just as he settled into the window seat, a gentle tap on his shoulder pulled him out of his momentary relief. "Excuse me, sir." Samantha's voice was polite but firm. "We need to discuss your seating assignment." Elijah's eyes met hers, steady and calm. "Is there a problem?" She glanced around quickly before lowering her voice. "There's been an unexpected change. We may have to move you to a seat in economy." A flicker of disbelief crossed Elijah's face. He swallowed, keeping his tone measured, but inside a storm of questions brewed. "I was upgraded to first class when I checked in," he said quietly. "This seat was confirmed less than an hour ago." Samantha looked uncomfortable. "I understand, sir, but the flight is full, and adjustments have to be made to accommodate everyone." Elijah nodded slowly, though his mind raced. He fought the rising heat of frustration, the familiar sting of being treated differently despite his service, his record, his dignity. He had learned to hold back these feelings, to stay composed, to never let the moment of injustice define him. But now, with the weight of his mother's condition pressing on him, it was harder than ever to suppress. He looked around. Other passengers were watching now, some with curious eyes, others trying to look away. A young woman seated nearby, her name tag read Maya Tran, subtly pulled out her phone and started recording. Elijah noticed, but said nothing. His internal dialogue was loud and clear. "Why is this happening again?" he thought. "How many times must I prove my worth beyond my skin?" The memories he had buried surfaced: random security checks, suspicious glances, the way business class attendants once questioned his boarding pass multiple times. Each incident a quiet reminder that, regardless of his rank or his medals, some doors remained harder to open. But Elijah Harper was not a man to retreat. His voice was steady when he spoke again. "May I please speak to your supervisor?" Samantha's eyes darted toward the cockpit before she nodded reluctantly and stepped away to make the call. Elijah sank back into the chair, his heart pounding not from the flight anxiety, but from the sting of an invisible barrier he had faced too many times before. His thoughts drifted to his mother, her strength, her resilience, the way she had raised him and his siblings with quiet courage and unwavering love. He knew she had taught him to stand tall, to hold on to his principles, no matter the opposition. The announcement to prepare for takeoff echoed faintly through the cabin. But Elijah's mind was elsewhere. A quiet determination settled within him. This was not just about a seat on a plane. It was about dignity, about respect, about the right to be seen and treated as a human being, no matter the color of his skin, and he was ready to make sure that right was not denied. Elijah Harper stood near the entrance to the first-class cabin, feeling the weight of the moment settle around him like the gentle hum of the plane's engines. His eyes, calm but alert, followed the soft movements of the flight attendants preparing the cabin. The sleek, leather seats gleamed under the cabin lights. For a man who had faced far more dangerous situations than this, the luxury of this moment was almost surreal. Yet the gravity of his personal mission was heavy. He was flying to see his mother, who was clinging to life hundreds of miles away. Every minute mattered. Samantha Cole approached with a professional smile, her fingers poised over the scanner as she looked at his boarding pass. The way her eyes flicked between the pass and his face held a tension Elijah couldn't quite place. Her warm greeting barely hid the slight nervousness in her voice. "Welcome aboard, Commander Harper," she said smoothly, her tone polite but brisk. Elijah returned the smile, a silent acknowledgment of shared respect for the military title he carried, earned through decades of service. He stepped forward into the first-class cabin, his footsteps steady on the carpeted aisle. The seat by the window was exactly as he remembered from his confirmation email, a plush sanctuary in the sky that promised a quiet, comfortable flight. He settled into the seat, adjusting the small pillow behind his back and placing his bag securely at his feet. Almost immediately, a gentle tap on his shoulder brought him back to the present. Elijah turned to find Samantha standing beside him again. Her expression was softer now, but there was a flicker of unease beneath the surface. "Sir, there's been a change," she said quietly, leaning in slightly so only he could hear. "I'm afraid we have to reassign your seat." Elijah's heart sank. He blinked, fighting the initial rush of disbelief and frustration. "I was upgraded to first class when I checked in," he replied evenly. "My boarding pass confirms my seat." "Has something changed?" Samantha glanced around before responding. Careful to maintain her professionalism. "Yes, sir. Due to an unexpected issue with seat allocation, we need to move you to economy." Elijah nodded slowly, keeping his voice measured even though inside a storm was brewing. "May I ask the reason for this reassignment?" There was a brief hesitation before Samantha said, "We're experiencing a full flight, and some adjustments had to be made to accommodate certain needs. It's nothing personal, sir." Elijah's lips pressed into a firm line. He could feel the eyes of nearby passengers flickering toward him, the tension in the cabin subtly shifting. He remembered the countless times he had faced similar subtle denials, the unspoken message behind phrases like, "nothing personal." But this was his mother's life he was rushing to, and this flight was the closest thing to comfort he could find in the chaos. He took a slow breath, drawing on the reserve of discipline that had carried him through the toughest days of his naval career. He had learned to mask frustration with calm, to speak clearly without anger, and to command respect with quiet dignity. "I understand the flight is full," he said carefully, "but I was specifically informed at check-in that my seat was confirmed. This reassignment feels sudden and unexplained." Samantha's eyes flicked away for a moment, as if she was searching for the right words or perhaps an escape. Then she said, "I wish I could do more, sir, but these decisions come from above." Elijah's mind flashed to memories of command decisions in battle, the orders he obeyed, the sacrifices he made, and the understanding that not all commands were just. But here, on this plane, the consequences felt deeply personal and painfully unjust. He looked back toward the aisle where a man in a business suit was being welcomed warmly by another flight attendant and shown to a first-class seat. The man nodded curtly at Elijah but offered no greeting. The contrast was sharp, almost jarring. It was an unspoken message Elijah had received before the subtle but clear indication that, despite his rank and service, he was not regarded the same way. He swallowed hard, trying to maintain the calm that had become second nature. "May I speak with your supervisor?" he asked, his voice steady. Samantha hesitated. The briefest shadow passed over her face before she nodded and walked toward the galley to make the call. Elijah returned his gaze to the window, the familiar patchwork of clouds and sky outside offering no comfort. His mind churned with questions. Why was he being singled out? Was it because of his skin color, because he was a veteran, because he was alone, rushing to his mother's side? The internal conflict gnawed at him. Part of him wanted to accept the reassignment to avoid confrontation, to keep the peace for the sake of his mother's fragile condition. But another part, stronger than ever in this moment, demanded dignity, it demanded accountability. He thought back to the lessons his mother had taught him growing up, the importance of standing tall, of speaking truth to power, of never allowing injustice to go unchallenged. She had been his anchor through turbulent seas, the steady hand that guided him toward honor and integrity. A soft murmur of conversation grew louder around him. A few passengers exchanged glances, some with curiosity, others with unease. Maya Tran, the young woman he had noticed earlier, discreetly began recording the scene with her phone. Elijah appreciated the silent support. Sometimes, witnessing was the first step toward change. Minutes passed. Samantha returned, her expression composed but resolute. Behind her followed a man in a sharp uniform, a supervisor named Daniel Reed. His gaze was professional but carried a hint of impatience. "Commander Harper," Daniel began, extending a hand which Elijah shook firmly. "I understand there's been some confusion about your seating." Elijah nodded. "Yes, sir. I was confirmed for first class less than an hour ago, yet I was informed I need to move." Daniel sighed lightly. "Sir, flights are complex operations. Sometimes aircraft changes or weight distribution require us to make last-minute adjustments." Elijah's eyes held steady. "I respect the complexity, but I've seen other passengers keep their first-class seats." What distinguishes me from them, Daniel's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Sir, we do our best to accommodate everyone fairly." Elijah paused, then asked gently but firmly, "Can you explain how fairness is determined?" The cabin fell into a hush. Other passengers watched, their curiosity turning to quiet anticipation. Daniel looked around, then said, "Sir, sometimes passenger comfort necessitates subjective decisions." Elijah met his gaze, voice calm yet clear. "Are you implying that some passengers' comfort is prioritized over others, based on what criteria the room seemed to hold its breath?" Daniel's smile was thin. "Sir, please understand that I'm only conveying airline policy." Elijah's internal conflict surged, the sting of being marginalized in plain sight, the frustration of unspoken biases masked by bureaucratic language. He fought to maintain his composure. "I appreciate your position, sir, but I must insist on an explanation beyond vague policies. I am a veteran traveling to see my critically ill mother. I deserve transparency." Daniel's eyes hardened slightly. "Sir, we're asking you to accept the seat reassignment or take a later flight." The words hit Elijah with a sharp clarity. It was no longer about policy, it was about exclusion. In that moment, he felt a mixture of sorrow and determination, the weight of a lifetime of service, sacrifice, and integrity clashed against the cold machinery of corporate protocol. Elijah drew a slow breath and said, "I am not refusing a seat. I am requesting to understand why my confirmed upgrade was revoked without explanation." Samantha stepped closer, voice lowering. "Sir, please step aside so we can continue boarding." Elijah looked around, meeting the eyes of several passengers now recording on their phones. Maya's camera was trained steadily on the scene, The internal voice in his head urged caution, but his heart and mind were clear. This was more than a seat. This was about respect, dignity, and justice. He stood his ground. Elijah Harper remained seated near the window, the soft hum of the plane's ventilation mingling with the low murmurs of passengers preparing for departure. The cabin lights cast a warm glow over the plush first-class seats, but the comfort around him felt hollow, shadowed by the quiet conflict unfolding just feet away. His mind replayed the conversation with Daniel Reed, the gate supervisor, and the subtle but unmistakable implication that his presence in first class was somehow unwelcome. The term passenger comfort had been used repeatedly, a vague phrase that seemed to cloak the reality beneath layers of polite corporate language. Elijah had heard that phrase many times before, in many places where bias quietly thrived behind professional smiles and routine policies. He watched Samantha Cole as she moved efficiently among the seats, greeting passengers, managing requests, and occasionally casting a glance in his direction. Her professionalism was impeccable, but the discomfort in her eyes told another story. She was caught between duty and the unspoken instructions she had received. Elijah's gaze drifted to the aisle where a small group of passengers whispered among themselves. Some exchanged furtive looks, others avoided eye contact entirely. The air was thick with tension, the kind of quiet that settled when people are aware of an injustice but feel powerless or unsure how to respond. Nearby, Maya Tran continued to record with steady hands. Elijah was grateful for her presence, not just for the video but for what it represented: a witness, a silent ally in a situation that was rapidly becoming a test of his dignity. He thought back to his years in the Navy, the discipline, the chain of command, the unwavering commitment to service and honor. Those years had taught him to endure, to keep a steady heart amid chaos. But those lessons also taught him the value of fairness, the importance of standing up for what was right even when the cost was high. His internal dialogue was a quiet storm. Is this what fairness looks like, he wondered. Is this the price I pay for the color of my skin, despite my service, my sacrifices? Elijah tightened his grip on the armrest, the leather cool beneath his fingers. He had faced hostility and prejudice before, but today it felt sharper, more personal, and more urgent. His mother's frailty added a layer of desperation he could not ignore. A soft voice broke into his thoughts. "Sir, would you like something to drink before takeoff?" Samantha asked gently, approaching with a tray of refreshments. Elijah looked up and offered a polite smile. "Water, please." As she poured the water into the glass, he asked quietly, "Samantha, may I ask, are you comfortable with how this situation is unfolding?" She hesitated, glancing around as if searching for a safe response. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, she said, "I wish things were different, sir. I wish we didn't have to make these choices." Elijah nodded slowly, sensing the weight of her words. "Me too," he replied. "Me too." The plane's engines roared softly as the cabin crew began their final checks. The flight attendants moved with practiced efficiency, but the undercurrent of unease persisted. Elijah's thoughts returned to the reassignment, the reasons given full flight, weight distribution. Passenger comfort felt like a veil for something deeper, something unspoken. He recalled the stories he had heard from other veterans and travelers of color who faced similar treatment: subtle, insidious acts of discrimination that chipped away at their dignity. The reality was that discrimination rarely came in overt forms anymore. It was the quiet exclusion, the invisible barriers, the second-guessing of one's right to occupy certain spaces. Elijah felt the familiar knot in his stomach tighten. He was not just fighting for a seat on a plane. He was fighting against a system that continued to send a message of exclusion and inferiority. His gaze drifted to a family seated across the aisle, two white children laughing quietly with their mother in first class. The contrast was stark and unavoidable. He glanced down at his hands and felt a surge of resolve. He would not be moved without a fight, but his fight would be one of calm dignity and reasoned insistence. Across the cabin, Maya Tran's phone continued to record. The act itself was a quiet rebellion, a refusal to let this moment be erased or dismissed. Elijah wondered if anyone else would speak up. Would any of the other passengers break the silence, or would they remain bystanders, wary of drawing attention to themselves? He thought about the lessons his mother had taught him about courage, not the kind that shouted, but the kind that stood firm in the face of injustice, that held fast to truth even when it was difficult. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, frustration, sadness, determination, but, above all, a deep yearning for justice. Just then, Daniel Reed returned to the seat next to Elijah, his demeanor more guarded. "Commander," he said, "I've spoken with the captain. Unfortunately, the decision stands. We need you to accept the reassignment." Elijah looked up, eyes steady. "Is there no room for reconsideration?" Daniel shook his head. "I'm afraid not. We need to proceed with boarding. Please understand, this is final." Elijah nodded slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Thank you for your honesty." As Daniel moved away, Elijah leaned back into his seat and closed his eyes briefly. The conflict inside him was fierce. How to balance the desire to keep peace with the need to stand up for his dignity. He thought of his mother's steady hands, the way she had held his as a child, teaching him to be strong, to speak up, to never settle for less than respect. A quiet voice in his heart said, "This is not over. Not yet." The flight attendant approached once more with a boarding announcement. The remaining passengers were asked to prepare for final boarding. Elijah rose slowly, looking around the cabin. Some eyes met his with sympathy, others with indifference. The weight of those unspoken judgments hung in the air. Before he could speak again, a voice from the back of the cabin caught his attention. A young man, seated in economy, called out softly, "Sir, if you need help, just say the word." Elijah's lips twitched in a faint smile. Small acts of solidarity mattered, he reminded himself. The plane began to taxi toward the runway. The hum of the engines grew louder, filling the cabin with a sense of inevitability. Elijah's mind raced with possibilities. Would this flight mark just another instance of quiet exclusion, or could it be the start of something larger, a challenge to the norms, a call for accountability? His thoughts were interrupted by Samantha's soft voice. "Commander Harper, the crew is ready when you are." He gathered his belongings, steeling himself for what was next. As he moved toward the rear cabin to take his reassigned seat, Maya's camera remained trained on him. The silent witness of technology, a tool that could amplify truth beyond the confines of this plane. Elijah walked past the rows of business travelers, the families, the young professionals, each absorbed in their own world but now part of a shared moment, whether they realized it or not. He reached the economy cabin. a stark contrast to the first-class luxury he had just left behind. The seats were narrower, the space tighter, the atmosphere more subdued. He settled into the aisle seat offered, feeling the eyes of some passengers lingering on him a little longer than usual. Elijah closed his eyes briefly, letting out a slow breath. This was his reality. The reality of many who faced subtle discrimination daily, masked by polite words and procedural justifications. But Elijah Harper was not defeated. His spirit, forged in the crucible of service and sacrifice, remained unbroken. He would not let this moment define him. He would stand firm, quietly but resolutely, for the respect he and so many others deserved. The plane prepared to lift off, carrying him not just toward Chicago, but into a fight far larger than a single seat. The cabin of Celestial Air's Flight 742 was alive with quiet tension as Elijah Harper sat in the economy section. The faint rattling of the aircraft beginning to rise in pitch as the plane taxied toward the runway. The contrast between the plush first-class cabin he had just left and this cramped space was jarring, but it was the principle of the matter that weighed heaviest on his mind. He could still feel the heat of the glances, the unspoken judgment lingering in the air around him. For a man who had spent decades commanding ships and leading teams in high-stakes situations, this felt like a battle of a different kind, one waged not with weapons, but with subtle prejudice and silent exclusion. As the flight attendants moved about the cabin, preparing passengers for takeoff, Elijah's gaze drifted to the young woman across the aisle. Maya Tran's phone was still in her hand, discreetly recording the moments unfolding around them. Elijah nodded at her briefly, silently thanking her for bearing witness. The familiar voice of the captain then came over the intercom, smooth and professional, but unaware of the storm brewing below. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are preparing for departure and ask that you please fasten your seat belts and ensure all electronic devices are set to airplane mode. Thank you for choosing Celestial Air." Elijah adjusted his seat belt, his fingers brushing the small pin on his lapel, a symbol of his service. It felt heavier today, as if the weight of his entire life's commitment to his country had been challenged on this very flight. A soft commotion near the front of the cabin caught his attention. Samantha Cole appeared again, her steps brisk but hesitant. She was speaking quietly to Daniel Reed, the gate supervisor, who had boarded just moments before takeoff. Elijah's mind raced. He understood the unspoken tension between airline staff and himself. Their hesitation was an acknowledgement of the controversy they knew was stirring, but it was also an indication of the pressure from higher-up pressure to resolve the situation quickly and quietly. Suddenly, the cabin door to the cockpit opened, and Captain Lawrence stepped out. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with a calm demeanor and sharp eyes that scanned the cabin. Elijah met his gaze and nodded respectfully. The captain returned the gesture, but his expression was unreadable. Minutes later, Samantha approached Elijah's row once more, her voice lowered and careful. "Sir, I need to ask you to come with me to speak with the captain." Elijah stood slowly, aware of the eyes now on him. The murmurs among passengers grew, a mixture of curiosity and concern. He followed Samantha toward the front of the plane, the aisle feeling narrower with every step. The quiet hum of the engines filled the space between words, and Elijah felt a knot tighten in his stomach. As he reached the cockpit door, Captain Lawrence greeted him with a firm handshake. "Commander Harper, "Thank you for coming," he said. "We need to discuss your seating situation." Elijah nodded. "Of course, Captain. I appreciate the chance." Inside the small cockpit anteroom, away from prying eyes and ears, Samantha closed the door softly behind them. Captain Lawrence leaned against the console, folding his arms. "Sir, I understand your frustration. The airline has policies that sometimes require us to make difficult decisions." Elijah's eyes remained steady. "Captain, I respect that you have responsibilities to all passengers, but these decisions appear to have been made without transparency and seem influenced by factors beyond operational needs." Lawrence sighed. "You're suggesting discrimination." Elijah's response was measured but unwavering. "I'm saying the circumstances and the explanations don't add up. Other passengers confirmed in first class kept their seats. I was singled out." Captain Lawrence looked away briefly, then back. "Our priority is safety and comfort. We don't discriminate." Elijah shook his head slowly. "The truth is often hidden behind polite phrases. I've experienced it before, and today is no different. I'm not just fighting for a seat. I'm fighting for respect." There was silence. The captain's gaze softened. "I understand, sir, but the flight must continue. We need you to accept the reassignment or risk being removed from the flight." Elijah swallowed hard. The stakes had grown. This was no longer a polite disagreement. It was a confrontation between his dignity and the airline's authority. "I'm willing to cooperate," Elijah said calmly, "but I will not accept treatment that undermines my service and my worth." Back in the main cabin, passengers had begun to notice the conversation near the cockpit. Whispers turned to hushed discussions. Maya Tran's phone continued to record, capturing every moment. Suddenly, a crew member's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that all passengers remain seated and comply with flight crew instructions." Elijah returned to his seat with a steady stride. His mind churned with conflicting emotions, the anger at injustice, the weariness of repeated discrimination, and a deep-seated resolve to see this fight through. He glanced at Maya. Her eyes met his, a silent message passing between them. This moment mattered. Then, the door to the rear cabin swung open, and 2 security officers stepped aboard. They moved with practiced authority, scanning the cabin as they approached Elijah's row. The murmurs grew louder. Passengers turned to look, their phones raised to record the unfolding drama. One officer, a tall man with a buzz cut and sharp eyes named Officer Miguel Santos, addressed Elijah. "Sir, we need to speak with you regarding your seating." Elijah nodded, standing slowly. Of course. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Passengers shifted uneasily, some whispering words of support, others uncertain. Officer Santos gestured for Elijah to follow him to a small area near the galley. Samantha and Daniel trailed behind, their faces tight with concern. Once there, Santos spoke quietly but firmly. "Sir, we've been instructed to ask you to comply with the crew's seating arrangements. If you refuse, we may need to escort you off the flight." Elijah's heart pounded. He thought of his mother, the urgency of his journey, the years of service that should have earned him respect rather than this confrontation. "I'm not refusing a seat," Elijah said calmly. "I'm refusing to accept being treated unfairly without explanation." Santos's jaw clenched. "Sir, this is not about fairness. It's about safety and compliance." Elijah shook his head. "When fairness and safety are used to justify exclusion, the real issue is discrimination." The argument hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. A few passengers rose to their feet, voices raised in support of Elijah. One man shouted, "Let the man sit where he paid," others began recording on their phones, the small glow of screens illuminating faces determined to witness and document. Elijah felt a surge of courage. This was no longer just his fight. It was becoming something bigger, a moment where silence could no longer be accepted. Samantha stepped forward, voice gentle but firm. "Sir, please, let's find a way to resolve this without disruption." Elijah looked around the cabin, seeing faces filled with a mixture of hope, fear, and solidarity. He took a deep breath. "I will not create a disturbance, but I will not be moved without reason. I ask again for transparency, for respect." The officers exchanged a glance. Santos nodded slowly. "We'll hold off for now, but you need to comply with the crew's instructions." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom again. "We are ready for takeoff. Please remain seated and fasten your seat belts." Elijah sat, heart steadying. The plane began its ascent into the sky, carrying with it a man who refused to be erased. Above the clouds, the battle for dignity was only beginning. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane ascended above the clouds. The hum of the engines was steady, a familiar sound that usually brought comfort to travelers. But for Elijah Harper, the flight was anything but routine. The tension from the gate lingered like a shadow over the economy cabin where he now sat, surrounded by passengers whose eyes occasionally flickered toward him with a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, or discomfort. Elijah adjusted his seatbelt and closed his eyes for a moment, trying to find calm in the turbulence of his thoughts. His mind drifted back to the moments before takeoff, those few intense minutes that had crystallized into a confrontation he never expected to face on a commercial flight. It began simply, with the request from the flight attendant, Samantha Cole, to vacate his first-class seat. It had been a polite but firm insistence that left Elijah grappling with disbelief. The vague explanations from the gate supervisor, Daniel Reed, had done little to soothe his growing sense of injustice. As the plane prepared for departure, the arrival of airport security officers changed the dynamic entirely. Officer Miguel Santos and his partner were trained professionals. But the situation demanded more than protocol. It required sensitivity, something that seemed absent that day. Now, in the cramped galley area, Elijah stood facing Officer Santos. The murmur of the cabin was a distant hum, but every movement, every word felt amplified in the confined space. Santos's eyes were sharp, his demeanor serious. "Sir, you need to comply with the crew's instructions or risk being removed from the flight." Elijah's gaze was steady. "I am willing to cooperate, but I will not accept being treated unfairly without explanation." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Santos's expression tightened. "Sir, we're just doing our job. Please understand this is about safety and compliance." Elijah shook his head slowly. When safety is used as a reason to exclude someone unfairly, it becomes discrimination. Tension escalated rapidly. A crowd of passengers, sensing the brewing conflict, gathered near the galley. Phones were raised, recording the scene with growing intensity. Maya Tran, ever vigilant, live-streamed the encounter, her voice calm but resolute as she narrated. Suddenly, Santos moved to guide Elijah toward the exit door of the plane. Elijah resisted lightly, not out of defiance but in defense of his dignity. "Please don't touch me," he said quietly but firmly. The officer's grip tightened. "Sir, you need to move." Elijah pulled back instinctively. His military training kicking in, always maintained control. Avoid escalation. But the physical contact was unexpected, jarring. There was a sudden gasp from the crowd. Passengers watching on their phones murmured in shock. Maya's camera captured every moment the moment Elijah's hand was held firmly, the subtle flinch of pain as he was guided roughly. Despite the suddenness, Elijah maintained his composure. "I am not resisting," he said calmly. "I am protecting myself from unnecessary force." The officers exchanged quick glances. Santos tightened his hold again, moving Elijah toward the aircraft door. The hum of murmurs swelled into voices, some calling for fairness, others urging calm. Elijah's mind raced. The pain in his wrist was sharp, but it was the deeper sting of humiliation that cut hardest. A decorated Navy commander, reduced to this moment on a flight he had every right to be on. The crowd of passengers began to push back verbally, demanding to know why he was being treated this way. A middle-aged woman's voice rose above the rest. "What's happening? He didn't do anything wrong." Others echoed her sentiments. The cabin crew looked unsettled, exchanging worried glances. Maya's livestream viewer count soared rapidly, her narration steady as she described the unfolding scene. "I'm at 35,000 feet on Celestial Air Flight 742. Security officers are forcibly removing a decorated veteran who was reassigned from first class without explanation. This is happening right now." The video spread quickly, with passengers sharing it on their social media accounts. The hashtag #Justice for Elijah began trending within minutes. Back in the galley, Officer Santos finally released his grip as Elijah was escorted to a seat near the back of the economy cabin. The officers took their positions nearby, their presence a silent warning. Elijah sat down slowly, rubbing his wrist where it ached from the rough handling. His expression was calm, but his eyes betrayed the pain and resolve within. A young man seated next to him offered a quiet nod of support. "You're doing the right thing," he whispered. Elijah nodded gratefully. The moment was painful, but the fight was far from over. As the plane leveled out, the captain's voice came over the intercom again, acknowledging a slight delay due to an unexpected issue on board. The crew worked quickly to restore order, but the undercurrent of unrest was unmistakable. Elijah sat quietly, his thoughts turning to the larger battle at hand. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about a system that continued to deny equal treatment to those who deserved respect the most. He thought of his mother, her frailty, and the urgency that had driven him onto this flight. The journey to her side had been marred by discrimination, but it had also ignited something greater, a determination to shine a light on injustice. The cabin lights dimmed further as the flight attendants prepared for service. Elijah took a deep breath and reached into his bag, pulling out a small notebook. He began jotting down the details of the encounter, the names, the times, the sequence of events. This record would be important, a tool for truth in the days to come. Nearby, Maya Tran continued to film discreetly. Her presence was a reminder that no moment of injustice would go unnoticed. Elijah's internal voice was clear and resolute. "This is just the beginning. I will stand firm, for myself, for my mother, for all who have faced this." The flight continued into the night, the city lights below twinkling like distant stars. Elijah looked out the window, the horizon endless and full of possibility. The road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready. His dignity was intact, and his voice would not be silenced. The turbulence of the evening flight did little to shake the unrest lingering within Elijah Harper's mind. Though the plane had settled into a steady course, his thoughts raced faster than the aircraft itself. Seated now in the cramped economy section, far removed from the comfort and respect of the first-class cabin he was promised, Elijah felt the weight of an invisible burden pressing down on him. This burden wasn't just the physical discomfort of the seat or the bruises on his wrist from the rough handling earlier. It was the sense of profound injustice that had been etched into every interaction since he had arrived at Monarch International Airport. Around him, passengers whispered and glanced toward the back of the plane. Some eyes held sympathy, others uncertainty, and a few were curious about the man who had become the unwilling center of attention. Despite the low lighting of the cabin, Elijah felt their gaze, and it both grounded and unsettled him. His phone buzzed quietly on the tray table. A message from his sister Vanessa appeared. "Mom asked about you. She's stable, but still very weak. Please hurry." The words were a fragile thread connecting him to the woman who had raised him, whose strength had shaped his character, and whose health now hung precariously in the balance. Elijah closed his eyes briefly, summoning a breath of calm. He was a man trained to face crisis, but this kind of fight, one fought on the battleground of human dignity, was different. It required more than strength. It demanded patience, resilience, and the courage to stand firm without losing composure. He opened his notebook, the small leather-bound journal he always carried, and began to write. The details of the encounter with Celestial Air's staff and security officers filled the pages: times, names, phrases spoken, and the sequence of events. This record was more than a personal chronicle. It was a testament to truth, a shield against attempts to erase his experience. Meanwhile, the video that Maya Tran had streamed from her phone was gaining momentum online. Within minutes of takeoff, viewers across the country began sharing and commenting. The hashtag #LaJusticeForElijah trended on social media platforms, igniting conversations about racial discrimination, veterans' rights, and corporate accountability. In the quiet hours of the flight, Elijah felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was anger at the unfairness, the humiliation, and the systemic barriers that still existed. There was sadness knowing how many others had suffered silently without recognition. But, amid it all, there was a flicker of hope, a hope that this moment could spark change. As the hours passed, flight attendants circulated through the cabin, their expressions a mix of professionalism and unease. Some offered discreet apologies, others avoided eye contact altogether. Elijah accepted their gestures with grace, knowing that many were caught between duty and discomfort. Back on the ground, the ripple effects of the incident began to surface. Vanessa, having seen the viral video, immediately reached out to a trusted civil rights attorney, Julian Price, a respected advocate known for his work fighting systemic discrimination. Julian recognized the gravity of Elijah's case and the potential to shine a light on deeper issues within the airline industry. Julian called Elijah during a layover, his voice steady and reassuring. "Elijah, I've reviewed the footage and your account. This is more than a seating dispute. It's a clear violation of your rights and a reflection of systemic bias. We need to prepare for legal action and public advocacy." Elijah listened, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He had hoped for justice, but was overwhelmed by the scale of the fight ahead. "I just want to get to my mother." he replied softly, "but I won't let this go unanswered." Julian's response was firm. "And you shouldn't have to. We'll fight not just for you but for others who have been marginalized." At the airline's headquarters, the story was causing a storm. Brian Caldwell, the PR director for Celestial Air, sat in a conference room flooded with calls, emails, and urgent requests for statements. The footage was being dissected, the public outcry growing louder with each passing hour. Brian's phone buzzed constantly as reporters from major networks demanded interviews. The company prepared a carefully worded statement expressing regret for the incident, but emphasizing their commitment to non-discrimination. However, the public remained skeptical, sensing the gap between words and action. Within the airline's ranks, employees were divided. Some sympathized with Aaliyah, quietly sharing their own experiences of bias and unfair treatment. Others feared the repercussions of speaking out. The internal culture, long criticized for lack of diversity and inclusivity, was now under intense scrutiny. As the plane touched down in Chicago, Elijah's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting feelings. Relief that he had arrived safely was mingled with anxiety about seeing his mother. He wondered if the fight he had begun would make a difference or if it would be lost amid corporate denials and media noise. At the airport, a small group of supporters greeted him: veterans, activists, and ordinary citizens moved by his story. Their presence was a balm, a reminder that he was not alone. Vanessa rushed forward, wrapping her arms around him tightly. "You're here," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Mom's been asking for you." Elijah felt a surge of emotion he had long held at bay. The personal cost of the ordeal was immense, but the love of family grounded him as they made their way to the hospital. Elijah reflected on the journey that had brought him here from the military to this unexpected battle for dignity in the skies. The story of a denied seat had become a symbol of something much larger: the ongoing struggle for equality, respect, and justice in everyday life. And Elijah Harper was determined to see that struggle through. The morning light filtered softly through the blinds of Olivia Reed's downtown apartment as she sipped her coffee and scrolled through her social media feed. Olivia was an investigative journalist with a keen eye for stories that mattered, stories that revealed uncomfortable truths and demanded accountability. When Maya Tran's livestream of Elijah Harper's confrontation with Celestial Air Security first appeared, Olivia's instincts immediately kicked in. The video was raw and unfiltered: a decorated Navy commander being forcibly removed from his confirmed first-class seat, his calm demeanor clashing with the escalating tension around him. It was a story that transcended the confines of a single flight or a single airline. It was about dignity, justice, and the persistence of discrimination in places where it was least expected. Olivia's phone buzzed as she forwarded the video to her editor. "We need to cover this. Now," she typed. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the responsibility she felt. Within hours, the story exploded across platforms. News outlets picked up the video, and hashtags like "Justice for Elijah" and "Celestial Air Incident" trended nationwide. Viewers shared their own experiences of discrimination in air travel, adding personal testimonies that underscored the systemic nature of the problem. Elijah Harper became an unwitting symbol, the face of a movement demanding change. Veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and everyday citizens rallied in his support. The narrative was clear: A man who had served his country with honor was denied basic respect and equal treatment in his time of need. Meanwhile, Julian Price worked tirelessly to coordinate legal and advocacy efforts. He connected with other attorneys and community leaders, preparing a class action lawsuit against Celestial Air for discriminatory practices. The case was gaining momentum, fueled by the growing wave of public outrage. Back at Celestial Air's headquarters, Brian Caldwell faced mounting pressure. The company's carefully crafted statements were met with skepticism and criticism. Activists accused the airline of tone-deaf responses and attempts to minimize the issue. Internal emails leaked to the press revealed discussions about managing passenger profiles in premium cabins, further damaging the airline's reputation. Isabella Grant, the newly appointed CEO, stepped into the spotlight. A seasoned leader known for her decisive action and commitment to diversity. Isabella understood the stakes were high. In a press conference, she acknowledged the failings exposed by Elijah's experience. Celestial Air is committed to learning from this incident and ensuring that every passenger, regardless of their background, is treated with dignity and respect. She said. Her words were met with cautious optimism, but many demanded more than promises. They wanted tangible change. Meanwhile, Elijah's story continued to spread. Olivia's in-depth reporting uncovered internal policies and employee testimonies that revealed a culture of subtle but persistent discrimination. Flight attendants described being instructed to monitor certain passengers more closely, while gate agents admitted to using comfort as a euphemism for exclusion. The public response was overwhelming. Protests were organized at airports nationwide. Social media campaigns called for boycotts of Celestial Air. Veterans groups issued statements condemning the airline's treatment of one of their own. Through it all, Elijah remained grounded. He continued to visit his mother's bedside, drawing strength from her resilience. Yet he also felt the burden of responsibility growing heavier. This was no longer just his story. It was a cause that had captured the attention of a nation. At home. Maya Tran received messages of gratitude and support from viewers who saw her as a courageous witness. The young woman, once an ordinary passenger, had become an essential part of the movement. Her decision to record and share the incident had transformed a moment of injustice into a catalyst for change. Elijah reflected on the power of community, the way ordinary people, united by a shared sense of fairness, could confront entrenched systems of bias. He was humbled by the support, but knew the path ahead would be long and challenging. Julian Price reminded him during one meeting, "This is about more than compensation or policy changes. It's about changing hearts and minds and creating a society where dignity is not conditional." Elijah nodded. His fight was no longer just for a seat on a plane, but for the principle that every person deserves respect and equality. As the media storm raged on, Celestial Air announced a comprehensive review of their policies and pledged to implement mandatory diversity and inclusion training. The airline promised to establish an independent oversight board to monitor compliance and handle complaints transparently. These steps were significant, but Elijah and his allies knew that real change required vigilance and persistence. They remained committed to ensuring that the airline not only apologized but transformed. The story of Elijah Harper had evolved from a personal ordeal into a national reckoning. It exposed the subtle forms of discrimination that persisted even in the most unexpected places, and reminded the country that the fight for equality was far from over. For Elijah, the journey was deeply personal, but also profoundly universal. It was a call to action for all who had faced injustice and for those willing to stand up alongside them. As Olivia Reed prepared her next report, she reflected on the power of a single video to awaken a movement. Sometimes, she wrote in her notes, the truth is captured in moments we least expect, and those moments can change everything. The atmosphere in the sleek glass conference room at Celestial Air's headquarters was thick with tension. Brian Caldwell sat at the head of the long table, his fingers tapping nervously on a stack of documents. Around him, the executive team exchanged uneasy glances, fully aware that the company's reputation teetered on the edge of crisis. The viral video of Elijah Harper's confrontation with airline staff had ignited a firestorm. Social media campaigns, news reports, and public outcry were mounting. Celestial Air was no longer facing a simple customer service complaint. It was under scrutiny for systemic discrimination. Brian cleared his throat. "We have to control the narrative," he said firmly. "Our first priority is damage control. We will issue a statement acknowledging the incident, express regret, and assure the public that we are investigating." Isabella Grant, the newly appointed CEO, leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Damage control isn't enough anymore. Brian, the public demands accountability and transparency. We have to show we're serious about change." Brian nodded, but his expression remained cautious. "Agreed. But we have to be careful not to admit liability. We don't want to open ourselves up to lawsuits or further negative publicity." The tension between protecting the company and addressing the issue head-on was palpable. Isabella knew that the half measures would only fuel the backlash. "We need a multifaceted approach," she said. "Acknowledge the mistake, commit to thorough investigation and reform, and engage with community leaders and advocacy groups." Meanwhile, the PR team crafted carefully worded statements. The initial release expressed regret over the unfortunate incident, emphasized Celestial Air's commitment to non-discrimination, and promised a full review of policies. But the public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Activists and legal experts criticized the language as vague and insincere. Many viewed it as a standard corporate response designed to placate rather than reform. Behind closed doors, internal emails leaked, revealing candid discussions among executives about managing passenger profiles in premium cabins to protect customer comfort. The revelation shattered any pretense of impartiality. Elijah Harper's legal team, led by Julian Price, pounced on the evidence. It painted a clear picture of systemic bias masked by euphemistic language and opaque policies. Julian spoke at a press conference, holding up a copy of the leaked memo. "This is not an isolated incident. It's a pattern of discrimination ingrained in corporate culture. Celestial Air must be held accountable." The company's board grew restless. Investors began to voice concerns about the financial impact of the scandal. Stock prices dipped as the story dominated headlines. Isabella convened emergency meetings to address the crisis. She knew that to regain trust, Celestial Air had to go beyond the statements. It needed concrete action. One of her first moves was to place Daniel Reed, the gate supervisor involved in Elijah's reassignment, on administrative leave pending investigation. Samantha Cole was also temporarily relieved of duty as the company reviewed staff conduct and training. Isabella personally reached out to Elijah, expressing regret and offering to meet. Elijah, though cautious, agreed. He understood that the path to justice was as much about dialogue as it was about legal battles. During their meeting, Elijah spoke candidly about his experience and the broader issues of discrimination in air travel. Isabella listened attentively, her demeanor sincere. "I want to assure you that Celestial Air is committed to making real changes," she said. "We will implement comprehensive diversity training, revise upgrade policies, and establish an independent oversight committee." Elijah nodded, appreciating the gesture but aware that words must be matched by action. "I will hold you to those commitments," he replied. The media covered the meeting extensively. Some hailed it as a positive step forward. Others remained skeptical. Within the company, the atmosphere was tense. Employees were divided between those who supported the reforms and those who resented the public scrutiny. Several employees anonymously reported ongoing discriminatory practices to the media, indicating that change would not be easy. Outside the corporate walls, community groups organized forums and town halls to discuss the broader implications of Elijah's story. Veterans, civil rights activists, and travelers of color shared experiences that echoed Elijah's. Elijah himself became a reluctant public figure, balancing his personal grief with the demands of advocacy. He appeared on news programs and spoke at events, emphasizing the need for systemic reform in the airline industry. Julian Price filed a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation, urging federal investigation into Celestial Air's practices. The agency responded by launching an inquiry, signaling that regulatory pressure was mounting. The airline's competitors watched closely. Some took the opportunity to publicly denounce discrimination and highlight their own diversity initiatives. Air Liberty, a major rival, offered Elijah complimentary flights and expressed solidarity with his cause. The corporate response and denial phase was a pivotal moment. It revealed the deep challenges of confronting institutional bias, the limits of corporate PR, and the power of public and legal pressure to drive change. Elijah understood that the fight was far from over. The incident was not just a personal injustice. It was a mirror reflecting systemic flaws in an industry long resistant to scrutiny. As the company struggled to contain the fallout, a movement was growing, one that demanded more than apologies, more than promises. It demanded transformation. For Elijah Harper, the journey had taken him from the cockpit to the courtroom, from a passenger to a pioneer, and through it all, his resolve only strengthened. The legal battle that Elijah Harper had unwittingly ignited was gathering momentum. Julian Price, with a team of dedicated attorneys, meticulously prepared a comprehensive case against Celestial Air. The evidence was mounting: the leaked internal memos, the eyewitness testimonies, the viral video capturing the raw moments of discrimination, all pieces of a puzzle revealing systemic bias hidden behind the airline's polished facade. Elijah sat in the small conference room of Julian's law office, a quiet determination etched into his features. The sterile walls and flickering fluorescent lights were a stark contrast to the chaos that had enveloped his life in recent weeks. Yet here, surrounded by documents and legal counsel, Elijah found a renewed sense of purpose. "I know this isn't easy," Julian said, looking up from a thick folder, "but your story is powerful. It's resonating across the country. People want change." Elijah nodded. "I just want to get to my mother and be with my family. But if my experience can help others, then I'm willing to fight." The path ahead was daunting. Celestial Air had deep pockets, an army of lawyers, and the resources to prolong litigation indefinitely. But Elijah's resolve was stronger than ever. Outside the courtroom, the public was watching closely. News coverage of the lawsuit stirred widespread conversations about race, veterans' rights, and corporate responsibility. Elijah became a reluctant symbol of a larger fight for justice. At home, the personal toll of the ordeal was undeniable. His mother's condition remained fragile, and the stress weighed heavily on the family. Vanessa provided unwavering support, managing hospital visits and keeping Elijah grounded. One evening, as Elijah sat beside his mother's hospital bed, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The memories of his military service, the camaraderie, the sacrifices, the moments of triumph and loss mingled with the harsh reality of discrimination faced in civilian life. His mother's hand was frail but warm in his. She squeezed it gently, eyes filled with quiet strength. "You've always stood up for what's right," she whispered. "Now you're standing not just for yourself, but for so many others." Elijah swallowed back emotion. "I want to make sure no one else has to face what I did." Meanwhile, the airline continued its efforts to manage the crisis. Isabella Grant worked tirelessly to implement the promised reforms. She met with diversity experts, revamped training programs, and established an independent review board to oversee complaints. However, change was slow and met with resistance within the company. Some employees resented the scrutiny, while others feared backlash for speaking out. The pressure mounted as federal regulators announced a formal investigation into Celestial Air's practices. The Department of Transportation demanded transparency and cooperation, signaling that regulatory consequences could follow. Julian's legal team capitalized on this momentum, filing motions to obtain internal communications and deposition testimonies. The legal fight was intensifying on multiple fronts. Amid the courtroom battles and media storm, Elijah found moments of introspection. The internal struggle between exhaustion and resolve was constant. Late one night, he sat alone on his porch, the quiet hum of the city around him. The stars above seemed distant yet constant, a reminder of the larger universe beyond his immediate troubles. He thought about the countless others who had endured similar injustices silently, their stories unheard and unrecorded. His phone buzzed a message from Maya Tran, now a civil rights correspondent who had followed his journey closely. "You're making a difference. Elijah, keep standing." He smiled faintly, grateful for the unexpected allies who had emerged. Their support was a beacon in the storm. The lawsuit would be a long road, but Elijah was ready. His dignity, once challenged in the confined space of an airplane cabin, had transformed into a quiet but unyielding force. He was no longer just a passenger fighting for a seat. He was a man standing for justice. The days following the public release of the lawsuit against Celestial Air were a whirlwind of activity. Elijah Harper found himself thrust into the national spotlight as the story took on a life of its own. What had started as a personal fight for dignity on a crowded airplane had grown into a movement demanding accountability from one of the country's largest airlines. Elijah's inbox overflowed with messages, some from strangers sharing stories of their own experiences with discrimination, others from veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and concerned citizens offering support. The weight of their words was both humbling and inspiring. One afternoon, Elijah received a call from Captain Jennifer Reyes, a decorated Air Force pilot and longtime advocate for veterans' rights. Jennifer had been following the case closely and wanted to offer her assistance. Elijah. Jennifer's voice was warm but firm. What you're doing is more than brave. It's necessary. The military teaches us to stand up for what's right, and I want to help make sure your fight leads to lasting change. Their conversation sparked a partnership. Jennifer helped connect Elijah with a network of veterans who had faced similar challenges, often invisible, often ignored, but no less real. Together, they began organizing forums and community meetings to raise awareness about discrimination in the airline industry and beyond. Veterans, travelers of color, and advocates gathered to share their stories, find solidarity, and demand reforms. Elijah also partnered with Maya Tran, who had transitioned from passenger to activist and journalist. Maya's videos and interviews brought a human face to the issue, capturing raw emotions and personal accounts that resonated with a wide audience. Their combined efforts sparked a ripple effect. Social media campaigns gained traction, and public pressure mounted. The hashtag #HowFlyWithDignity trended alongside #Justice for Elijah, symbolizing a broader call for equality and respect in air travel. Celestial Air found itself at a crossroads. The company's leadership recognized that the crisis could no longer be managed with mere statements or temporary fixes. The movement was too powerful, too widespread. Isabella Grant took a bold step, announcing the creation of a new office dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion, led by Nathan Wilson, a former whistleblower and employee who had bravely exposed discriminatory practices within the airline. Nathan's appointment sent a clear message. Celestial Air was committed to transforming its culture from within. He began conducting comprehensive reviews, interviewing employees at all levels, and working with external consultants to develop actionable reforms. However, the path was far from smooth. Resistance within the company persisted, and change often met with skepticism. Nathan faced challenges in overcoming entrenched attitudes and systemic barriers. Outside the corporate walls, civil rights organizations intensified their advocacy. Legal experts debated the broader implications of the lawsuit, emphasizing the need for regulatory reforms across the industry. Olivia Reed continued her investigative reporting, uncovering similar patterns of discrimination at other airlines. The issue was not isolated to Celestial Air. It was systemic. Elijah remained at the heart of the movement, balancing his personal struggles with his public role. His mother's condition had stabilized, providing him some relief, but the emotional toll was profound. One evening, after a long day of meetings and interviews, Elijah sat quietly in his living room. Vanessa joined him, her presence a comforting reminder of family. "You've come so far," Vanessa said softly, "but I can see it's wearing on you." Elijah nodded. "It is, but this fight is bigger than me now. It's about all the people who don't have a voice." Vanessa reached out, squeezing his hand. "We're here with you, every step." The support fueled Elijah's resolve. He knew the journey ahead was long, but he was no longer alone. The movement inspired others to speak out, creating a groundswell of voices demanding change. Airlines began reevaluating their policies. Government officials initiated hearings, and public discourse shifted toward greater awareness of racial and social justice in travel. Through it all, Elijah Harper remained a symbol of dignity, courage, and unwavering commitment to justice. His experience illuminated the challenges many faced silently and ignited a call to action that transcended boundaries. As the movement grew, so did hope, a hope that one day no traveler would have to fight for the simple right to fly with respect. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Elijah Harper took his seat beside his legal team. The day's proceedings marked a critical turning point not only for Elijah, but for the broader fight against discrimination in the airline industry. The case had evolved far beyond a personal grievance. It had become a symbol of systemic inequities demanding redress. Inside the packed courtroom, media crews jostled for position, eager to capture every moment. Supporters gathered in the gallery, including veterans, civil rights advocates, and ordinary citizens inspired by Elijah's courage. Their presence was a powerful reminder that this was more than a legal battle. It was a movement. Julian Price stood confidently at the podium, his voice steady and compelling as he presented the case. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened to Commander Elijah Harper was not an isolated incident or a simple misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act of discrimination, embedded within corporate policies designed to marginalize and exclude. The judge listened intently as evidence unfolded a damning mosaic of internal emails, testimony from airline employees, and the viral video that had sparked national outrage. The courtroom was silent, the weight of the truth undeniable. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, a crowd gathered. Protesters carried signs emblazoned with slogans like "Equality in the skies" and "No more silent discrimination." The air was charged with determination and hope. Elijah, though exhausted from the prolonged legal process, felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey had been arduous, marked by emotional upheaval, media scrutiny, and personal sacrifice, but today represented a step toward justice. After hours of testimony, the judge called for a recess. Elijah stepped outside, greeted by cheers and applause from supporters. He took a moment to absorb the scene, the faces of those who had stood with him, the media flashes, the palpable energy. A reporter approached. "Commander Harper, what keeps you going through this fight?" Elijah's eyes reflected a mix of resolve and humility. "It's not just about me. It's about every person who has been denied respect because of who they are. I want to ensure that no one else has to endure what I did." As the trial resumed, Celestial Air's defense team attempted to downplay the evidence, portraying the incident as a regrettable but isolated case of operational necessity. But the mounting testimonies from former employees and experts painted a starkly different picture, one of a corporate culture resistant to change. Isabella Grant, now under intense pressure, appeared in court to testify. She acknowledged shortcomings and expressed commitment to reforms, but faced tough questioning about the timing and sincerity of the company's actions. The proceedings drew national attention. Editorials and opinion pieces debated the broader implications. Veterans groups intensified their advocacy, emphasizing the importance of honoring those who served with dignity in all aspects of life. Behind the scenes, Elijah's legal team prepared for a decisive closing argument. They knew the verdict could set a precedent impacting not just Celestial Air, but the entire airline industry. Outside the courthouse, Maya Tran live-streamed the day's events, her voice steady and passionate. "Today, we witness a pivotal moment in the fight against discrimination. Commander Harper's courage has lightened the way for many others. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the city, Elijah found a quiet moment to reflect. The journey from that fateful flight to this courtroom had transformed him from a man seeking justice for himself to a leader advocating for systemic change. His mother's words echoed in his mind. You're standing not just for yourself, but for so many others. Elijah Harper was ready for whatever came next. The courtroom was quiet as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Elijah Harper sat with a calm but resolute expression, flanked by his legal team and supporters who had stood by him through every twist of the journey. Months of hearings, testimonies, and public discourse had led to this moment, the culmination of a fight for dignity, justice, and systemic change. When the judge finally spoke, the weight of the words filled the room. The court found Celestial Air liable for discriminatory practices against Elijah Harper and others similarly affected. The ruling mandated the airline to implement extensive reforms, including transparent seating policies, comprehensive diversity training, and the establishment of an independent oversight committee to monitor compliance. A wave of relief and triumph washed over Elijah. The victory was more than personal. It was a beacon of hope for all who had experienced quiet injustice. The decision sent ripples throughout the airline industry and beyond, signaling that systemic discrimination would no longer be tolerated or hidden behind euphemisms. Outside the courthouse, supporters erupted in cheers. Veterans, civil rights activists, and everyday citizens celebrated together, united by the power of one man's courage to spark profound change. In the weeks that followed, Celestial Air's transformation gained momentum. Isabella Grant embraced the court's ruling with renewed vigor. Working closely with Nathan Wilson, the airline's diversity and inclusion director, to ensure reforms were substantive and lasting. Nathan's task force conducted thorough audits, revamped hiring and promotion practices, and launched outreach programs to foster a culture of inclusivity. The airline also partnered with community organizations to create scholarships and internship programs aimed at increasing diversity in aviation leadership. Elijah remained deeply involved throughout, using his platform to advocate for continued accountability. He spoke at conferences, shared his story with media outlets, and supported legislative efforts aimed at strengthening anti-discrimination protections nationwide. His mother's recovery was a source of strength and motivation. The moments they shared, though tempered by the gravity of recent events, were filled with quiet pride and hope. She reminded him that progress often came in slow, steady steps, a marathon rather than a sprint. The airline industry began to feel the ripple effects of Elijah's stand. Other carriers reevaluated their policies and training programs, spurred by public pressure and regulatory scrutiny. The Department of Transportation expanded investigations, signaling a new era of oversight and transparency. Maya Tran's journalism career flourished as well. Her courageous decision to record and share Elijah's story had launched her into a role as a respected civil rights correspondent. Her work continued to shine a light on social justice issues, inspiring a new generation of advocates. Elijah often reflected on the unexpected path his life had taken, from a simple seat assignment to a nationwide movement. His experience had revealed the power of standing firm in one's dignity. He remained humble but determined. The fight against discrimination was ongoing, but the victory proved that change was possible. As he prepared to board a flight for the first time since the ordeal, Elijah felt a profound sense of closure and anticipation. This time, he would fly not just as a passenger but as a symbol of resilience and hope. The airline staff greeted him with respect and warmth, a reflection of the transformation underway. The flight attendants, diverse and welcoming, ensured every passenger felt valued and safe, looking out the window as the plane soared into the sky. Elijah thought of his mother's words about the slow, hard work of progress and the courage to keep moving forward. The journey was far from over, but the horizon was brighter. Elijah Harper had reclaimed his dignity, and in doing so, had opened the door for many others to do the same. Elijah Harper's journey teaches us a profound truth. Dignity is not a privilege to be granted. It is a fundamental right. His story is a heartfelt reminder of the countless individuals who endure discrimination quietly, whose voices often go unheard. Yet, through his strength and the solidarity of those who stood with him, we witness the power of courage to ignite change. We honor Elijah's resilience and the love that carried him through dark moments. But we also condemn the deep-rooted prejudices that tried to silence him. Discrimination, whether subtle or overt, wounds us all and has no place in a just society. This story is not just about one man's fight for a seat. It's about reclaiming respect for everyone. It's about shining a light on injustice so it can no longer hide in the shadows. Thank you for joining us in this important conversation. If Elijah's story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring and eye-opening content. Together, we can stand against discrimination and help build a future where dignity and respect are truly universal. Stay tuned for our next video. You won't want to miss what's coming next.